Hi, everybody. Just a shade early, like 7 o'clock is early, I guess. We have a couple of questions. Uh, Thanks for those questions, by the way. And one's from Toshi and one's from Natalie Taylor. And Toshi says, I've been thinking about energy transmission and wondering why science hasn't done a good job of describing and understanding it yet. For example, when we focus on our hands, the skin might tingle with energy so that the skin and our body is a sensor of some sort. And what is it sensing? And then it says, if it's electromagnetic energy, then shouldn't we be able to detect it with instruments? Interesting series of comments and questions. So let me just say I've been thinking about transmission of energy, wondering why science hasn't done a good job of describing and understanding it yet. We have a bit of a dilemma when we talk about energy. There's been a number, and especially in the 60s and late 50s, I think, and maybe early 70s, there's been a number of small books written about energy in the theme of parapsychology, especially in Russia. And I think it was called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, was one book that was quite fascinating. And a number of small books in the U.S. about healing. One especially coming out of Philadelphia, and I apologize, I cannot remember the name of the book, but there were a few healers in Philly, and they were trying to prove there was a kind of a cathode that they set up, like a long tube, and they had a rare gas in there. Argon is what they were using, if my memory serves me. And they would bring their hands up and move energy in, and you could perceive the argon moving. And they were trying to link up energy through that tube. It didn't go very far, but they could move energy and prove that there was energy moving through. Scientists have always been interested in the physical aspects of intensity or energy. If you're looking at biology, for example, energy terminology is used quite often, but they're relating to cells, movement of cells. And when you're looking at that, you're looking at a different, one could say, a more physical orientation into things we can't really see unless we have such things as electron microscopes, and a newer version of such. And looking at a real history of biology. And that, according to some, is not really the same kind of energy that is engaging with energy off body. There's a lot of judgment around that, and a lot of, I'll say it out loud, sometimes superstition, and sometimes very religious orientation. But if you took a look at aspects of energy work, like, for example, what we've been talking about, anything related to energy in our physical world, then science has been very interested in this, and it should be. Often things like Tai Chi and Qigong and a lot of other energetic forms have been interested in movement of, and parapsychology, by the way, has been interested in movement of form or energy emotionally. One can always say, well, yeah, but Ron, it might be mental too. Yeah, it could be an aspect of mental, perhaps, or an aspect of emotional energy relating to the mental side of things. If you have any kind of an idea around that, then you know when you're doing Qigong or Tai Chi, after a while, you can feel energy or focus on hands or people, and energy will be there. There's another level of energy, could be mental energy. The kind of mental energy, I'm really not talking about a physical assertion here. I'm talking about the assertion of, or one can talk about the assertion of focus and movement. It's an area where you can perceive these things, and some have cultivated a capacity to transmit energy at other people, not always for very much benefit either, because we have personalities. We're still on the same subject. And attitudes about other people vary tremendously based on thought. We think this way, they think that way. This dialectical idea of us and them, which is in itself pretty immature for most of the time. And hopefully I don't offend too many people, but the point is there are so many opinions. Well, these opinions, if you're really intense with them, they tremendously transmit. It's not a joke. We would not call that physical. If you were a scientist, you would say, well, that's not really real. Except in physics, there apparently thought has an impact on energy, period. I'm inclined to agree with that one fairly easily. And people have an impact on other people, and I'm inclined to agree with that one. But if you're not sensitive to it, you probably notice it as an aspect of your own personality. This is too bad, because our sensate relationship with our personality is highly focused on the value we place on what we say or do. That's very physical. Again, so you can hear the tones of reference related to physical engagement, and that's where our focus is. An emotional engagement, you'll find that very much involved with the physical as well, but there are other levels of emotion. The same, pretty well mentally, you can have ideas moving through your head that stimulate the emotional disposition and then activate an emotional response in relationship to a thing we call personality, which is a focusing form. in a kind of a way. And we have an unconscious focusing form, a conscious level, and there seems to be another level where you're not even aware of what you're doing and you don't much care what you're doing in the personality aspect. Once you get an idea in your head, you believe it. There's no changing. Sad, but it's the physical way of engaging without getting too far afield from an honest engagement. All of us know that we have changed our minds in many ways about many things. And if you haven't, it means you have defended yourself and stayed in a position that makes you feel more comforted or comfortable in how you perceive yourself. Well, it's the same thing in any orientation. What do I mean by that? I mean, science can get that way too. Why would anyone, as a scientist, unless they're really interested, focus on something that others are not interested in science? Well, I have an answer for that. If you're really interested in science, then you would really be interested in the science of anything and everything, no matter what it is. If there is a so-called philosophical or religious orientation that is, or an energy that is beyond our understanding, why would you not want to try and figure out what that might mean? In fact, there seems to be a binding together of even religious ideas and scientific ideas about whether one would be more right than the other. It's not science. If there is anything out there, in there, then that should be, I would agree, Toshi, something to be investigated. It just so happens that we're investigating in a small, tiny little way. The capacity of an individual to gain access to a perception of energy beyond the personalized version of what it calls worth or value, or what it gives the personality as a level of value. And even that has been used as levels of value. It still is. In kind of a way, sad, but in a kind of a way, makes sense. We normally do things that way until we move into a different understanding of something. But we are slow in our willingness to understand beyond what you already believed must be true. When we focus on our hands, the skin might tingle with energy. But there's a trick in this. If you do that, you're focusing on like so, and you can grunt and you can move energy across from hand to hand, and it will tinkle your hand. Pretty physical stuff. Often people call that the etheric, but it's a name. You can call it whatever. Just call it energy. Some people call it healing energy. Some people call it all kinds of things. I'm important because I can do this. No, that's not why you do it. You do it so that you can get to the point where not a single thought is in your mind. Not a single intensity is in you. Not a single personality view of you being valued is in you. And you would tend somehow to ask within yourself if there is something beyond that constructed form that we call personality. And it is a constructed form. To see if we can notice energy by not doing anything. And if you can, then it may be coming in from another state. We've talked about the physical and the emotional and the mental and the personality and focal form that we have that identifies and expresses and values something energetically, but includes your physical body, and that's where most people focus in this world. Physical body includes the brain and the nervous system. But if there is something more, we need to investigate that. This is a method of investigating that. That becomes interesting to me. Oh yes, now, just a minute. Is there the possibility of using your personality as a major focus and intensifying, as a number of people in that book I told you about, Psychic Discoveries, Behind the Iron Curtain, trying to get something to move across the table, but can you send energy out towards other people for purposes related to you? Yes, you can. In Ottawa, in the 1970s, I met a gentleman that had been trained in the, let's say, one of the police forces that we have, by another chap that I happen to know. He was actually a psychologist, a very good one, but he was more interested in parapsychology for a purpose that was constructive relative to his job. Teaching people how to move energy in waves through their brain to confuse them and get them to be uncomfortable and make mistakes in interviews and stuff of that nature. Well, this is not science fiction. This is reality. And he was very disturbed when I told him what he was doing. He said, "You know that?" I said, "Absolutely." "Well, I have to go. I think my wife is making supper." And I said, isn't a very positive purpose, but it is if you're dealing with somebody that you want to make uncomfortable. A number of years ago, two of my friends, one from India, one from Canada, and myself were in India, up in the Himalayas. And he was living in a cave, this gentleman. Also, he was an engineer. And he was a long story, he was an engineer who was building a bridge in one of the, I think it was in Poland, but he was there in the summertime doing his meditation. And he had the ability to transmit energy into the solar plexus and move the center. See, we all have places that, like little kind of images that in areas that we normally express ourselves and how we express ourselves and the depth of intensity and surface parts where there's kind of a three-dimensional form within a potential form that we already use as uh, part of our personality traits. And there's a center in there, central area that makes you feel comfortable. This is not science fiction. This is just reality. If you don't know anything about it, it doesn't mean it's not real. This individual could move that over about 3 to 6 inches, and you would feel really awful or feel as if you had to dial it, express something, or didn't know how to do something. Made you very uncomfortable. And fortunately, there is a way of moving that center back to your center. And fortunately, reflexively, I knew how to do that. And when it happened and it went back, he immediately moved it back again, and I moved it back again. Because that's an inner dialogue that teaches you. And he was surprised, and he said, you know how to do that? And I said, why are you doing what you're doing? He says, I can teach anybody how to do that. It's $2,000 a month. And come to California, and I will teach. I won't take any more than 20 or 30 students a month, but I will teach you how to make that happen in another person. And I said, no, thank you. Why would I do something like that? It's disrespectful, first of all. It certainly isn't kind. But he says, now here's the deal. He said, but don't you like to win arguments? And I said, not really. But do I? Depending on who it's with, and whether it's playful or whether it makes any sense or not. Anybody likes to win an argument. This way, he said, you can win the argument. You'll confuse them. They won't be able to talk. This is not the kind of scientific investigation we need. As a species, we're all too interested in manipulation. Unfortunately, we most of the time don't know we're doing it. Or maybe we do. This is not the kind of investigation that is necessary. There's an ethic with this. And we don't know very much about this stuff. We're barely interested in making sure that nothing really bad happens to anybody and everybody. You can see how difficult this is. If we were talking about this as if it wasn't real, that would be a totally different thing. To be honest, why would anybody want to do these kinds of things? Because they can, is what he said. They can learn how to do this. And he asked me if I would stay the winter there in his cave, keep his cave for himself. Side story. And I said, no, I'm really not interested. He said, yeah, but we have a refrigerator. And we bring a wire down from that pole. And we have a heater. And we have a small little tiny stove. And it's well stocked. It'll last the whole winter. I said, no, thank you. Gave up my chance to be a yogi. Or somebody I could engage with to learn something from. No, it's not a joke. But these things, one thing about, I better say this, one thing about real science Real science has an ethic, and it's a fairly good one. Sometimes there's problems with it, but that's how it happens with folks. But most times, it's pretty ethical. Religions aren't always ethical. Ethics comes out of an individual, the best they can do. And if you're hurting real bad inside, your ability to be reasonably ethical is difficult because you're attempting desperately to survive, not because you're a bad person, because you're attempting desperately to survive the hurts that are inside that sometimes you won't even acknowledge. And there's an ethic that's valuable in research like this. And this kind of research will begin to get stronger, ultimately. Where it starts, it's got to be pretty ethical. That's where it will start. The dilemma with this is that there is an electromagnetic component on the physical levels. It's my belief. Because you can feel, it's like feeling the heat of an intense person 10, 15 feet away. But I'm talking about energy that can be perceived 10,000 miles away, that has nothing to do with negation of an individual. I'm sorry, I don't apologize for this, but I think there is some ethic that is universal, an energy that might be universal. And I mean universal in terms of states of development. I'm not talking about heavy-duty physical state here. One of the reasons we are doing, or attempting to do what we're doing, is to try and stimulate energy coming in and through us for the purpose of being helpful to others in their inner growth, not by your transmission. Not by being more able than somebody else. At another level, if you are less able than someone else, and they see that you are doing something the best you can, you will get some help. Unfortunately, sometimes that help is uncomfortable because it will show you how you function in behind the scene of your conscious awareness of your personality. It floats into your personality so you can see it. Now, all you do then is soften down a bit and say, my gosh, I think I do that from time to time. Then slow it down. Engage with helping yourself just the best you can. But continue to do that the best you can, because you will think and you will assert that you are now free of all this and that, of intensities that you believe other bad people use. These are not bad people. They don't know any better. How can you possibly, if you have been acting in a certain way all your life and believe that it's the only way to act, how can you possibly think that that could be bad? terrible assertion or expression. But in fact, you can't figure out because you already believe in the one thing that's really important to you. You. To move into these other states, not so simple. So we have to go piece by piece, step by step. I suspect, along with Tosia's question here, which is a dandy, that science will one day, because of experiences and because of those who are helping, as this individual was helping the police services to be, let's say, more able in some form of way, very physically, by the way, emotionally physical, using intensity, physically physical, mentally engaging. Because of that, things of this nature that don't have a religious background, you see, we have a dilemma. And the dilemma is verbiage. Where some modes will call it spiritual. Anything they do spiritual, even if they push people away from them, that would be spiritual because they're not good people, because they don't engage exactly the way we do in our thinking or use the same words. That to me is not overly spiritual, but that's my thought. You need to think this through for yourself. But be careful. Honestly, you will tend to be physically focused. In other words, anything that comes out of your mouth will have to be aligned with what you believe within your personality construct, which is basically relatively physically focused. And that's hard for us to understand. Doesn't mean that we're not capable of engaging with states beyond what we're used to with that personality form, because it can be expanded beyond what it's normally used to. My goodness, so much beyond. But this is not easy for us to engage with higher states, if you can, if it can be developed. And then notice that some of the higher state engagement does not necessarily agree with what you already believe must be true. We have a number of years to go through before we can even allow ourselves to think that that might be viable. But we have examples of folks that, from a religious point of view, have been models. And unfortunately, what they've had to do with their great ability is model relative to the times that they have lived in. And we also have brilliant people, and I mean brilliant, scientifically focused, brilliant folks. IQs not near 180 or so. Our average is about 100 if we're lucky, 110 if you're becoming more able, 130, more able, 170, 80, really able. The problem that comes with that is a worth, a value is placed on this, where you're held in check by yourself, thinking you're very bright and functional. And you are, except not in everything. That means if you can see it, it means you have room to grow. As opposed to thinking everything that comes out of your mouth will be exactly perfect. It's a dilemma because if that is in your mouth, you will know whatever you think you know exceedingly well, down to details. But the opening of that mind is more difficult for you because staying in that position is reassuring and worth making and value making for you. It's what we do. No negativity attached to that. Many outliers, and when I say that, I mean people who are working on the edges of what we believe in or have encapsulated as only truth, are those who can be allowed to open their minds. But also they have to deal with themselves. This is not always easy for them. So one of the reasons why it's very difficult, not only for science in relationship to that, what is the value of doing that? There's a value, monetary value placed on these things. And like everything else, if it doesn't fit a value that is fairly firmly established, it will not be looked at too well. Those folks, when they were looking through their argon tubes, argon is a kind of not a gas you find around too many places. And energy being used there by those folks, they have to be ministers. And they were trying to let themselves go. They were doing the best they could. And when they did that, and for those few seconds when they really, really could, and it wasn't about only feeling the energy there, that's like first steps. It was about letting the energy move in from a higher state by taking your attention off yourself. Not long ago, the Dalai Lama gave quite an interesting talk about the nervousness that he had within himself, about how difficult it was to take the attention away from the importance of the self, to be open enough to have energy move in from another level and operate through you for a purpose that related to it, not to us. And he said, we're not very far with that. I happen to agree with him. We're not very far with that. I think we're really very well adapted to the concept of being important because we can do stuff. That's honest. Trying to be honest with yourself is very difficult. But it's important when you're relating to being honest with you, not about other people's honesty. Let them work at that one. You work at yours. And I'm not talking about stuff you already agree with. I'm talking about trying to ferret through the field of clay that we sit in. And we know we're right about certain things until we find out we're not. Is it okay then to move forward? Absolutely. Or would you rather just stick and say, no, I'm not moving forward? And besides, I think it has to be this. This is what we do, but not always. And I think science is there, and I think religious backgrounds and some philosophical backgrounds are there also. And I do not think it's so easy to move out of that. And here's another thing. One thing about science is really fascinating. I like about science. If they find out that something doesn't quite work the way they hoped it did, pure science will say, this isn't as right as we thought it was. There's something missing here. I wonder what's missing. Asking the question. Like, these questions are so important that, no offense, that I ache to get from people, because it opens the mind. It allows you to be okay with asking a question. Someone said to me, I have a question, but it's so dumb. And I said, what question is it? It was the most interesting question. Very difficult to try to answer. I don't care what other people think about your questions. There are so many levels within an answer of a question. You can take it from this point of view, or that point of view, or this point of view, or that point of view. That's the wondrous thing about questions. These questions, something has been on my mind for about 40 years now. How can we change a language? And then I say, change, God. How could we have a language that supported everyone's view of higher states? That we could inquire into higher states, not only lower states, but never stop inquiring into lower states. Lower states, I mean the physicality of a relationship with life. And that's really important, because it certainly helps us to understand the complexity of a relationship with living. Biology is a course I never took, but it's fascinating to me. So read as much as you can. Here's one book, The Song of the Cell. If you ever get your head around that one, it's most fascinating. I love that other book, and I forget the name of it, that Toshi and Sonia were talking about. I think everybody should read that one too. Great. I've forgotten. Sorry about that. But you can look it up. You can look at the emails that Toshi and Sonia were talking about. And it's just a fascinating book. And there are others too, on trees, by the way. Nature itself is fascinating. The Mother Tree, I think, is one other book that is really an interesting book. Dig. the more you broaden out past what you think you know, the more you become interested in things past what you know. You're never going to learn everything and anything, and don't compete about all that stuff. Just be curious. It sends you back into being young again. Wow, what an interesting way to think of things. And you're talking to yourself when you're saying that. Okay. Toshi, I don't think they have any instruments that detect, but they are using experiments. Some people are using experiments, and they're quite emotional and mental. And they're then watching the people who are subjected to these experiments to see if there was any response. And these are like anecdotal, and I don't like them, but they're there. And it's really important to know that. And they've been going on certainly since the 60s and 70s. But I don't call that science necessarily. I call that true experience, though. There is another one here. Thanks, Toji. Another one here, if I have enough time. I'm just looking at my iPad. I'm running out of. Natalie Taylor. She says, I have a question for you about how to approach meditation. When I'm out walking in nature, I find it very easy to have a felt sense of connection with a higher presence to reach up. Maybe that's part of because my body and emotions are busy with something other than themselves, could be. But it's very easy for me to feel loving and being loved by a higher level when I'm out walking. Let me just touch on that for a second. When you're walking in nature, especially trees, often, not always, there will be a sense where the trees themselves have a good root center at another level and the ground center. And there is sap running through these trees. It's a life construct of nature. It's profoundly interesting. It affects you because there's an automatic transmission there. You affect others if that is also true of you. Then when you add your thing onto it, your personality onto it, then you affect them differently. The trees don't quite do it that way. There's a gentleness that can happen there and an engagement, so that what's really happening is your whole system is broadening out a little bit, and it's helping you to feel softer. Just saying that can happen. Experienced it myself so many times, but not all of me. Many people have had this sensation. I would probably not call it a higher state. I would call it another state, different than yours, that can be helpful in broadening out your particular state. That's what I would probably do. You don't have to agree with me. Check it out for yourself. But when I meditate, I'm much more defensive. That's the personality and how meditation should occur and what it should be like and why it should be like that and all the rest of the stuff that goes along with being knowledgeable about something and valued for that way of thinking. We don't think about that like that necessarily, but it's still there. The physical intensity is quite strong, for one thing. That's a clue. But also, as soon as I close my eyes, I feel like I drop down inside myself. There is a feeling that relates to that and can be. And I'm semi-conscious of dreams going on. You're dropping into the unconscious just a little bit. So you learn, you remember I used to talk about this an awful lot when we were talking about learning to understand these things. You're meditating and then you drop into another state. Sometimes you can feel the drop physically because you're slightly out of sync with your personality's exact way of functioning. You're into a new way of functioning. So you perceive that and assess that. That's the nature of a personality. We do that. This is different than this. So now we know something, right? Maybe. I'm not conscious enough to make sense of the dream images. It's okay. Just let them happen. You don't always have to pay attention to that stuff. Let it be. If you don't, you will become important as you are able to see those images, but you'll be important because you know those images and you perceive them, and then you'll try to explain them, and then you'll be off meditating. Meditation is the purpose of meditation. When those other things come, I'm sorry, come back later. I'm meditating now, the best you can. But we look for approval, our version of approval, whatever that would be, not negative, but we do. This is how we all do this. Just, it's what we do. Not to do about being bad or good or right thing, wrong thing. Let it go the best you can. But you'll be pulled because the personality is so strongly affixed to doing things the way it thinks it needs to do things in our world to be valued and comfortable, relatively speaking. Just enough to feel the kind of chaos and chaotic inside. It would be chaotic if you can't make sense of something. Please, plus, I'm defensive of the changes that energy may be working on in me. Yeah. Look, this is a normal state. This normal state can go on for 500 years until something throws you out of interest, or it can go on for 10 years. Throws you out of interest, or 20 or 40 or 50. Many times, the interest that you focus on suits the personality because our training is that if you do something, do it to be helpful to you in some way so that that will be engaging enough in the world to make sense in the doing. Just makes sense doing it. Nothing happens or you're not too pleased with your meditation, you won't keep it going. Well, why? Because we're trained to look at things slightly differently. And in our world, where do you go? You go and take a course, or do you wonder what the value of the course is before you take it? Interesting idea. Think about that. Do both. If you feel comforted, do it that way. My question is, coming to your question now, which were before, they were all questions. My question is, how to bring the sensation of love I feel outside into the meditation instead of feeling so vulnerable and so bothered by the never-ending stream of images that happens until I pass out. My version of staying conscious in meditation seems to be more like gritting my teeth. Here's the deal. Best I can. Every time you see an image, say, sorry. I'm busy meditating. I know that doesn't sound right. I'm sorry. I'm busy meditating. Out you go. Another one you can say, if you're not from the highest and best, I'm not interested. Out. But you'll forget to say these things. That will not be negative. It will be normal. Or you'll assess whether that's of value before you even do it. And for you, it may not be valuable. For me, it has been valuable, but it may not be valuable. Think it through. Wonder about, even though you're nervous, about changes that may occur in you through meditation. Think about it. Wonder about it. If you're okay with growing internally and externally to some degree, proceed relative to, while you're meditating, what you think might be helpful, as opposed to falling back into your previous routine. And that is the defense against growing beyond where you are now. This is just normal. There's no negation in this. None whatsoever. Just keep at it the best you can. Thank you, Natalie. Very interesting. Thank you, Toshi. Very fascinating. In my opinion, two really good questions. And yes, just so that I bring this up and tell you the name of that book that I couldn't remember, if I can. Excuse me. Braiding Sweetgrass was the one that Toshi was talking about. Worth putting on your reading list, please. It might be interesting to you. The Mother Tree is another one. The Song of the Cell, it may take you about 6 months to read it. Don't give up. It's very fascinating. It's about you. It's about me. It's about everybody else. I wish you well, everybody. We're going to meditate. And let's see what I can come up with for meditation music. Let's try this one today. रत्नैः कल्पितमासनं हिमजलैः स्नानं च दिव्याम्बरम् नानारत्नविभूषितं मृगमदामोदाङ्कितं चन्दनम् जाति चम्पकबिल्वपत्ररचितं पुष्पं च धूपं तथा दीपं देवदयानिधे पशुपते हृत्कल्पितं गृह्यताम्
रत्नखण्डरचिते पात्रे घृतं पायसम् भक्ष्यं पञ्चविधं पयोदधियुतं रम्भाफलं पानकम् शाकानामयतं जलं रुचिकरम् कर्पूरखण्डोज्ज्वलम् ताम्बूलं मनसा मया विरचितं भक्त्या प्रभो स्वीकुरु छत्रं चामरयोर्युगं व्यजनिकं चादर्शकं निर्मलम् वीणाभैरिमृदङ्गकोहलकला गीतं च नृत्यं तथा साष्टाङ्गं प्रणतिः स्तुतिर्बहुविधा एतत् समस्तं मया सङ्कल्पेन समर्पितं तव विभो पूजां गृहाण प्रभो आत्मा त्वं गिरिजामते सहचराः प्राणाः शरीरं प्रभुम् पूजा ते विषयोपभोगरचना निद्रा समाधिस्थितिः सञ्चारः पदयोः प्रदक्षिणविधिः स्तोत्राणि सर्वा गिरो यत् कर्म करोमि तत् अखिलम् शम्भो तवाराधनम् करचरणकृतं वा कायजं कर्मजं वा श्रवणनयनजं वा मानसं वापराधम् विहितमविहितं वा सर्वमेतच्छमस्व जय जय करुणाब्धे श्री महादेव शम्भो न तातो न माता न बन्धुर्न दाता न पुत्रो न पुत्री न भृत्यो न भर्ता न छाया न वेद्या न वृत्तिर्ममैव गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि भवाब्धावपारे महादुःखभीरो प्रपात प्रकामी प्रलोभी प्रमत्त कुसंसार पाश प्रबद्ध सदा गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि न जानामि दानं न च ध्यानयोगम् न जानामि तन्त्रं न च स्तोत्रमन्त्रम् न जानामि पूजां न च न्यासयोगम् गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि न जानामि पुण्यं न जानामि तीर्थम् न जानामि मुक्तिं लयं वा कदाचित् न जानामि भक्तिं व्रतं वापि मात गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि कुकर्मी कुसङ्गी कुभक्ति कुदास कुलाचारहीन कदाचारलीन कुदृष्टि कुवाक्य प्रबन्ध सदा गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि प्रजेशं रमेशं महेशं सुरेशं दिनेशं निशीथेश्वरं वा कदाचित् न जानामि चान्यत् सदाहं शरण्ये गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि विवादे विषादे प्रमादे प्रवासे जले चानले पर्वते शत्रुमध्ये अरण्ये शरण्ये सदा मां प्रपाहि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि अनाथो दरिद्रो जरारोगयुक्तो महाक्षीणदीन सदा जाड्यवक्त्रा विपत्तो प्रविष्ट प्रणष्ट सदा गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि गतिस्त्वं त्वमेका भवानि शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् नित्योऽहं शुद्धोऽहं बुद्धोऽहं नित्योऽहं शुद्धोऽहं बुद्धोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् नित्योऽहं शुद्धोऽहं बुद्धोऽहं नित्योऽहं शुद्धोऽहं बुद्धोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं शिवस्वरूपम् अद्वैतमानन्द न च श्रोत्रजीवे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च व्योमभूमिर्न तेजो न वायुः चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् न च प्राणसंज्ञो न पञ्चवायो न वा सप्तधातु न वा पञ्चकोश न वा पाणिपादम् न चोपस्थपायो चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् न मे द्वेषरागो न मे लोभमोहः मदोर्नैव मे नैव मात्सर्यभावः न धर्मो न चार्थो न कामो न मोक्षः चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् न पुण्यं न पापं न सौख्यं न दुःखं न मन्त्रो न तीर्थं न वेदानयनं अहं भोजनं नैव भोज्यं न भोक्ता चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् न मृत्युर्न शङ्का न मे जातिभेदः पिता नैव मे नैव माता न जन्म न बन्धुर्न मित्रं गुरुर्नैव शिष्यः चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् विभूत्वाच्च सर्वत्र सर्वेन्द्रियाणां न च सङ्गतं नैव मुक्तिर्लभेया चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं 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 शिवोऽहम् ब्रह्ममुरारिसुरार्चितलिङ्गम् निर्मलभासितशोभितलिङ्गम् जन्मजदुःखविनाशकलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् देवमुनि प्रवरार्चितलिङ्गम् कामदहन करुणाकरलिङ्गम् रावणदर्पविनाशनलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् सर्वसुगन्धिसुलेपितलिङ्गम् बुद्धिविवर्धनकारणलिङ्गम् सिद्धिसुरासुरवन्दितलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् कनकमहामणिभूषितलिङ्गम् फणिपतिवेष्टितशोभितलिङ्गम् दक्षसुयज्ञविनाशकलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् कुङ्कुमचन्दनलेपितलिङ्गम् पङ्कजहार सुशोभितलिङ्गम् सञ्चितपापविनाशकलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् देवगणार्चितसेवितलिङ्गम् भावैर्भक्तिभिरेव च लिङ्गम् दिनकरकोटिप्रभाकरलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् अष्टदलापरिवेष्टितलिङ्गम् सर्वसमोद्भवकारणलिङ्गम् अष्टदरिद्रविनाशकलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् सुरगुरुसुरवरपूजितलिङ्गम् सुरवनपुष्पसदार्चितलिङ्गम् परमपदं परमात्मकलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम्
Now let's begin to do the balancing and grounding, and have a good evening, everyone. Talk to you soon.